Forest mysteries. Thomas's footsteps crunched softly against the icy, uneven ground as he moved through the shadows of the abandoned mining settlement. The wind's relentless wail tore through the empty structures, whipping snow into swirling eddies that cloaked the landscape in a ghostly shroud. His lantern flickered irregularly, casting trembling pools of dull yellow light across rusted machinery and shattered windows. Every gust seemed to carry a faint metallic chime, a subtle reminder that this place was not entirely silent. Something had stirred beneath the decay. He paused beside a twisted heap of scrap metal, eyes narrowing into the darkness. The cold seeped through his worn coat, biting into his bones, but an instinctive prickling at the back of his neck told him to pay attention. The faint metallic sound, almost like a distant, irregular bell, had prompted his curiosity. He tilted his head, trying to catch it again, but only the mournful wind responded, echoing through the empty ruins. A sudden gust of wind sent snow spiraling violently around him, stinging his face with tiny, icy shards. He wiped sweat from his brow, blinking against the sting, and rubbed his eyes to clear the fog that clouded his mind. His breath formed quick puffs in the frigid air as he shifted his weight, clutching his lantern more tightly. The settlement stretched before him, silent, bleak, yet somehow alive with unseen movements. Something within urged him to investigate the faint disturbance among the derelict vehicles and machinery. Carefully, he approached a line of rusted trucks, their paint peeling and surfaces corroded, windows long shattered. The snow had accumulated in thick drifts, hiding the uneven terrain beneath. His boots crunched softly with each step, deliberate and cautious. The wind's scream intensified, causing the lantern's flame to dance erratically, casting flickering shadows that twisted into unsettling shapes across the metal carcasses. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye, an almost imperceptible shift among the twisted frames. A small figure, or perhaps an object, darted briefly behind a heap of scrap. Thomas froze, eyes narrowing, mind racing to interpret the fleeting motion. His grip on a lantern tightened, the cold metal handle grounding him. The faint metallic chime resumed, soft, deliberate, almost like a whisper in the storm's roar. He took a step closer, every nerve alert. The storm's howling seemed to lessen momentarily, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. Approaching a battered, long-dead machine, he scanned for clues, anything out of place. The oppressive silence was broken only by the distant, mournful wind. Near the base of a rusted crane, a faint glint caught his eye. Something small, half buried in the snow, yet shimmering faintly in the lantern's weak light. His breath hitched. Could it be? He knelt carefully, brushing aside icy flakes. The object was cold and smooth. He picked it up, revealing a tiny, tarnished gear, perhaps part of a larger mechanism or something more mysterious. The metal was cold to the touch, but the weight of it in his hand felt significant. A shiver ran through him, not from the cold alone. His instincts sharpened, warning him to proceed with caution. The discovery was unexpected, and he wondered what secrets this gear might conceal. Rising to his feet, he glanced around again, eyes narrowing. The snowstorm had picked up again, obscuring his view, but when the flakes settled, he saw movement, something more defined this time, a shadow slipping behind the remnants of an old mining cart. His heart quickened, yet he remained steady, fighting the urge to call out. The storm's noise would swallow any shout. Instead, he moved silently, lantern low, casting a weak, shifting pool of light across the snow. Every step was deliberate, measured, as he approached the shadow, trying to discern its form. A faint metallic clink echoed, closer now. Thomas's gaze snapped to the source. There in the swirling snow was a small, hunched figure, indistinct but unmistakably present. It moved cautiously, as if aware of his presence but unafraid or resigned to the situation. His grip on the lantern tightened, muscles tense, as he hesitated briefly before taking another step forward. "Who's there?" His voice was low, almost lost in the wind's shriek. No reply, only the muffled sound of shifting snow. The figure paused, then slowly turned, revealing a tiny, trembling shape, covered in snow, eyes wide and wary. Thomas's chest tightened as instinct warred within him. The desire to shoo it away clashed with a deeper compassion. He lowered the lantern slightly, studying the trembling creature. Its fur was damp, tiny paws scraping at the icy ground as it hesitated, then edged closer. It was a wolf cub, no more than a few months old, lost and shivering amid the storm's fury. A surge of empathy flooded through him. The loneliness, the relentless cold. He understood the creature's despair. Carefully, he extended a gloved hand, voice softening despite the harsh conditions. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The cub hesitated, then, sensing no threat, pressed itself against his palm. Its fur was damp, its breathing ragged. Thomas felt a strange warmth amid the icy chaos, an acknowledgement that life persisted even in the bleakest moments, fragile yet resilient. As the storm raged on, something within him shifted. The fear of solitude, the weight of despair, momentarily eased by the tiny creature's trust. He looked into its wide, trembling eyes, feeling a faint flicker of hope ignite. The snow continued to fall, relentless and cold, but in this frozen night, a fragile connection had formed. The cub depended on him now, just as he realized he could no longer ignore the faint signs of life amid the desolation. He gently tightened his grip on the wolf cub, glancing back toward the dark, snow-choked landscape. Somewhere out there, the wind carried a distant, mournful howl, part warning, part call. He was no longer entirely alone. The storm's fury pressed around him, but inside, a renewed sense of purpose grew. The discovery of the gear and the shadow had revealed that this place still held secrets, perhaps even threats, but also the possibility of hope and companionship. With a steady breath, Thomas prepared to move forward, determined to protect this fragile life and himself in the icy silence of the abandoned settlement. The night had changed him just as he had changed it. Thomas's eyes flicked toward the faint shimmer beneath the snow, a subtle gleam catching the early dawn's pale light. The biting wind cut through his coat, numbing his fingers as he moved cautiously toward the wrecked bulldozer. Its engine was half buried in frozen mud, rusted and still, yet amid the tangled debris, a flicker of movement drew his attention, a brief, frantic twitch among the wreckage. He paused, inhaling sharply as his breath crystallized in the cold air. Every sound seemed muffled. Only the faint crack of shifting snow beneath his boots broke the heavy silence. His gaze settled on the dark cavity of the excavator's cabin, where a tiny form trembled violently. A small creature curled tightly, its body shivering uncontrollably. The dim light revealed a damp, fragile bundle. Was it alive? His pulse quickened, concern and dread mounting. He hesitated only a moment before carefully kneeling on the icy ground, reaching out with gloved hands, fingers stiff but gentle, aiming to assess the trembling figure. A faint whimper escaped, swallowed by the vast stillness of the winter landscape. Thomas's eyes widened as he recognized it. A wolf pup, no more than a few weeks old. Its fur was matted with snow and dirt, ears drooping, eyes glazed with exhaustion and fear. The pup was wedged between the rusted seat and the icy floor, unable to free itself. His mind raced. What had caused this? Why was it here? The storm's fury had battered the landscape. But how had this vulnerable creature ended up trapped inside the wreckage? The answers weren't clear, but he knew he couldn't leave it to die. The pup's body was icy, trembling, tiny paws scraping against the cold metal as if trying to crawl away. The instinct to abandon it tugged at him, yet compassion overpowered hesitation. He slowly reached in, feeling the slick, frigid fur under his gloves. The pup flinched at his touch, muscles tensing sharply. Its small eyes fluttered open, revealing a luminous, frightened gaze. Thomas spoke softly, voice barely above a whisper, trying to soothe the trembling bundle. "Easy, little one. I won't hurt you." His words sounded distant and strange in the cold air, but he knew the pup needed reassurance, not fear. The creature's gaze searched his face, uncertain but recognizing a faint kindness amid the darkness. With deliberate care, Thomas lifted the pup from its icy prison. Its limbs were stiff, fragile, drained by the cold. As he eased it free, snow and ice crumbled away, exposing a tiny, trembling body that seemed to shrink even further in his hands. The interior of the wreckage was a labyrinth of rusted metal and frozen debris, shadows dancing in the dim light. He cradled the pup close, feeling its shivering form pressed against his chest. The warmth of his body contrasted sharply with the icy chill outside. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps this small life could survive the storm. Why was it here? How had it come to be trapped amid the wreckage during this relentless blizzard? Questions pressed on him, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the immediate need, saving the fragile creature. He pulled a worn cloth from his coat pocket, an old but clean piece, and wrapped the pup carefully, trying to conserve what little warmth he could offer. The tiny body twitched as he pressed the cloth around it, feeling the cold seep into his bones. The pup whimpered again, weakly, and a pang of guilt struck him. Standing slowly, he made sure not to jostle the bundle. Outside, the wind howled anew, snowflakes swirling in a furious dance that muffled all sounds. The storm's roar was deafening, a reminder of nature's indifference. Yet inside the wreckage, a fragile spark persisted, a heartbeat, a whisper of hope. His gaze lingered on the pup's face, noting the faint flicker of life in those dark eyes. Exhausted, possibly starving, but alive. That small existence depended on him now. His grip tightened slightly, a silent vow forming. He cast a wary glance toward the storm outside, which showed no signs of abating. The blizzard had already claimed so much: his peace, the quiet of the wilderness, maybe even his hope at times. But this tiny creature was a reminder that life persisted, even amid chaos. The decision solidified. He had to protect it, not merely because it was helpless, but because it symbolized something more, an affirmation that compassion could survive even in the harshest conditions. The icy fingers of fear and doubt threatened to creep in, but he pushed them aside. He moved toward the narrow opening, each step deliberate and cautious. The snow outside was blinding, swirling relentlessly, threatening to swallow him whole if he lingered. Yet he knew he couldn't leave the pup exposed to the cold and the storm's merciless grip. As he stepped into the swirling snow, he tightened his coat around himself, clutching the fragile bundle close. The bitter wind sliced through his layers, biting into his skin and bones. His eyes swept the bleak landscape, searching for shelter or signs of life beyond the wreckage. A faint sound reached his ears, soft, almost like a whisper. He paused, listening intently. Was it the wind, or something more? The distant howling of wolves, perhaps, or a memory long buried. The storm obscured everything, but his instincts urged him onward, toward safety, toward hope. With each step into the storm, the cold seeped deeper, yet a growing resolve strengthened within him. The pup pressed against his chest, a tiny beacon amid the endless white. The storm threatened to swallow everything, but here, in this frozen wasteland, a fragile hope had taken root. He knew the journey ahead would be arduous, physically and emotionally, but he understood that sometimes saving one life was the only act that mattered, the only truth capable of piercing the darkness. The pup's faint heartbeat was a silent promise. Life could endure, even here, in winter's coldest grip. As he pressed forward, the storm's fury roared around him, yet inside, a new purpose blossomed, one born from compassion, resilience, and the unwavering will to protect the vulnerable. The landscape stretched before him, bleak but not unbreakable, filled with the possibility that even amid destruction, hope could be reborn. The fire's glow waned, shadows stretching across the battered walls of the old wagon as a cold wind seeped through the cracks. Outside, snow drifted silently, muffling the world into a monochrome silence that pressed against Thomas's ears. He sat unmoving, eyes fixed on the flickering embers, memories swirling like the blizzard raging beyond the thin wooden walls. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire, but inside his mind, echoes of the past stirred. Images of fur, howls, and a promise long sealed. He remembered the first encounter with that wolf family, an uncertain, trembling figure emerging from the woods under a canopy of stars. It had been years ago, when he had stumbled upon a den displaced by hunger and fear. The mother, scarred yet fierce, had watched him with cautious eyes, her pups curled protectively beneath her. Back then, a strange instinct had overtaken him, a desire to shield and preserve what was vulnerable. Driven by this, he had approached carefully, offering scraps of food he carried, risking the wildness that could turn on him at any moment. A bitter smile flickered as he recalled how the mother's growls gradually softened into tentative trust. He remembered gently lifting a trembling pup from beneath a fallen branch, its tiny body soaked in mud and cold, trembling violently in his rough hands. The warmth of its fragile form had seeped into his bones, awakening a long-buried sense of purpose beneath layers of exhaustion. Wrapping the creature in his coat, he whispered softly, trying to soothe himself as much as the pup. That moment marked a turning point, an act of compassion amid chaos. Yet, as seasons passed, that memory became distant, almost unreachable. He had watched the family grow stronger, learning to hunt, reclaiming their territory. But nature was relentless, and time had taken its toll. The biting cold, relentless storms, and his own waning strength pressed heavily on him. Still, the bond persisted, etched deep into his soul, unbroken by distance or the years. Now, alone in darkness, Thomas's gaze drifted to the shadows beyond the flickering light. The night was oppressive, filled with the scent of snow and the quiet of a world that refused to stir. The wind whispered softly, tugging at the worn curtains, as if calling him back to those distant days. A sudden gust rattled the windows, causing him to shiver despite the warmth of the fire. His fingers traced the rough grain of the wooden table, seeking comfort in the familiar texture. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers closing around a small, worn token, a fragment of bone carved with a paw print. It was a reminder, a symbol of his vow, the same vow that had driven him to risk his life for creatures of the wild, creatures who had once trusted him enough to allow his presence. An ache of longing pressed against his chest, yet within it stirred a quiet resolve, a flicker of purpose. What had he truly sacrificed for that promise? Sleep, comfort, safety, all surrendered to keep a piece of the wilderness alive in his heart. He wondered if the wolves still remembered him, if their spirits lingered in the shadows of these silent woods. The thought of their distant howls made his throat tighten. Could he find them again? Could he aid them if they called? The wind's mournful cry seemed to answer. It tugged at his consciousness, stirring a restless urge. The idea of stepping outside, risking the cold and unseen dangers, flickered like a fragile flame within him. He hesitated, the weight of uncertainty pressing down, yet a quiet voice urged him forward, reminding him of the bond he had forged, of the duty he had sworn to uphold. He slowly shifted, rising from the wooden stool with deliberate care. His joints protested after years of wear, but his resolve remained firm. Moving toward the door, he paused, hand resting on the tarnished brass latch. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed, a pristine blanket hiding secrets beneath. Darkness stretched infinitely, silent and vast. Still, something called him, an instinct rooted in memory, duty, hope. He stepped outside, the cold biting through his coat as he moved toward the shelter of nearby trees. His eyes scanned the shadows, listening intently for any sign, any distant cry. The wind tugged at his hair, and for a moment he felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, offering no light, only faint starlight struggling to pierce the gloom. Deeper into the woods, his senses sharpened. Every rustle, every whisper of snow became an answer to an unspoken call. Yet, instead of searching blindly, he focused on the faint sound of movement, something deliberate, cautious. His heart quickened, not with fear, but with purpose. He knew that if he was to reconnect, it had to be on new terms, with patience and understanding. Suddenly, a flicker of movement among the trees caught his eye, a sleek silhouette, silent and alert. His breath caught, heart pounding softly. He slowed, watching intently, sensing that the forest was waiting for him to act. The faint rustle of fur, the faintest whisper of movement, familiar yet different, prompted him to step closer, cautious but determined. It was her, an adult wolf, her coat shimmering in the dim starlight, eyes bright with intelligence. She paused, sensing his presence, then moved with measured grace, approaching him cautiously. Their eyes met, an unspoken exchange of trust and wariness. Thomas knelt slowly, extending a hand in peace. The wolf hesitated, then stepped forward, scenting him carefully. In that quiet, snow-blanketed moment, realization dawned. His vow was not just about rescue, but about mutual understanding. The wilderness had not abandoned him. It had waited for him to remember that true bonds required patience, respect, and humility. The wolf's cautious approach signified a new beginning, not just for her, but for him. He reached into his coat, retrieving the worn token, the fragment of bone with the paw print. This time, he held it out not as a symbol of a past promise, but as an offering of trust. The wolf sniffed it, then nudged his hand gently. A small, shared gesture of acknowledgement. As the night deepened, Thomas felt a shift within himself. The cold, the darkness, and the solitude no longer felt oppressive. They became part of a larger purpose. The wilderness was no longer a distant memory, but a living partner in his journey. His understanding had deepened, his resolve strengthened. He rose slowly, the wolf at his side, and together they moved deeper into the forest. The shadows no longer seemed threatening, but alive with silent promise. The distant howls echoed faintly, not as warnings, but as calls of connection. The bond between man and nature was fragile yet resilient, built on trust, patience, and shared survival. By the time he reached the edge of the trees, the first hints of dawn tinged the sky with pale light. The snow sparkled softly, untouched and pure. Thomas looked back once, then forward, knowing that his path had changed. The wilderness had given him a second chance, not just to find the wolves, but to understand himself. The promise he made long ago was still alive, renewed through patience and respect, ready to guide him into whatever lay ahead. The howling wind tore through the battered shelter with relentless fury, slamming the corrugated metal walls and causing them to shudder under the force. Snow whipped in chaotic swirls, blurring the outside darkness into an indistinct, shifting mass. Inside, Thomas sat rigid, clutching his coat tightly around him, his gaze fixed on the swirling shadows beyond the narrow window. The storm's roar drowned out all other sounds, yet an icy, persistent whisper seemed to seep through the cracks, an almost inaudible call that prickled his skin with unease. The flickering lantern cast, trembling, elongated shadows that danced across the cramped interior. Every creak of the wooden floorboards and groan of the metal frame amplified his awareness of vulnerability. The oppressive weight of the night pressed down on him, making him question whether remaining inside could truly keep him safe. His mind raced, tried to dismiss the strange sensations. Was it merely the wind, or was something else lurking just beyond his sight? Suddenly, a sharp, metallic scrape shattered the storm's chaos, faint but unmistakable. His heart jolted and he froze. The sound was unnatural, out of place amid the howling gale, as if someone or something was trying to approach, using the storm as cover. His thoughts darted through possibilities. An animal, perhaps, driven by instinct into the shelter's vicinity, or a human intruder exploiting the chaos to slip closer unnoticed. He moved cautiously, almost imperceptibly, toward the small window. Peering through the frost-covered glass, he saw only the swirling snow and shadows twisting into strange shapes under the wind's relentless assault. The darkness beyond seemed to pulse with a life of its own, alive and watching. Then a faint, rhythmic tapping reached his ears, delicate yet persistent, coming from just outside. It was too controlled to be the storm's echo. It had to be deliberate. His stomach clenched with suspicion. Was someone trying to communicate? Or was it a warning? Years of solitude had dulled his instincts, but now they stirred anew. Thomas hesitated, torn between the urge to ignore the sound and the primal need to investigate. His thoughts flickered to the wolf pup he had rescued. Fragile, trusting, vulnerable in a world turned cold and unpredictable. Could he afford to ignore that instinct now? A sudden gust battered the shack, causing it to shudder violently. The latch rattled dangerously, and for a moment, Thomas feared it might give way. He threw his weight against the door, pressing his shoulder into the latch, trying to reinforce it against the storm's fury. His fingers gripped the cold metal tightly, knuckles whitening. Every muscle tensed as he strained to listen, eyes darting toward the darkness outside, searching for movement or signs of intrusion. Amidst the storm's deafening clamor, he caught a faint whisper. Was it a voice? No, just the wind, he told himself. Yet the tone was different, softer, urgent, almost pleading. The sound repeated, growing clearer despite the chaos. It seemed to come from just beyond the thin door, from the shadows lurking outside the limited glow of his lantern. His pulse quickened. Could someone be seeking help? Or was this a warning? The old instincts, dulled by years of isolation, stirred again. Thomas's hand trembled as he reached for his makeshift club, instinctively ready to defend himself. But a strange, compelling feeling rooted him in place. Perhaps this was not an enemy, but someone in need. The wind carried the sound again, and this time he was certain the voice was trying to reach him, beckoning him into the storm. A shiver ran down his spine, and he pressed his ear against the door, listening intently. The call persisted, steady and almost desperate. The storm's roar masked the words, but the tone conveyed urgency and longing. Questions flooded his mind. Who was calling? Why now? What danger lurked beyond the fragile walls? Minutes stretched as the wind's assault intensified, relentless and unforgiving. Every sound seemed magnified, every shadow threatening. Yet amid the chaos, a new resolve took shape. Staying hidden might offer temporary safety, but ignoring a plea for help or risking missing a crucial sign could prove deadly. He moved slowly toward the door, every muscle taut. The call continued, echoing in his mind as much as in the night. With a deep breath, he reached for the latch, hesitating briefly as a new thought emerged. Perhaps this was his test, his chance to confront the unknown, to trust his instincts despite the fears that had haunted him for years. As his hand grasped the latch, the wind's cry suddenly surged, as if sensing his decision. Outside, shadows seemed to deepen, swirling into unnatural shapes. The voice called again, clearer now, cutting through the storm's rage, a summons, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. Thomas's grip tightened. He knew that whatever lay beyond that door could be perilous. Yet he also understood that retreat was no longer an option. The storm was more than just a tempest. It was a barrier and a catalyst, an obstacle and a test. Battered and weary, he steeled himself to face it. He pushed the door open just enough to see outside, eyes adjusting to the darkness. The wind tore at his coat and hair, relentless in its fury. For a moment, he saw only the swirling snow and shifting shadows. Then, faintly, he glimpsed movement, something small, swift, and desperate, darting just beyond his line of sight. The call had been answered, and with that, the true challenge of the night had begun. In that instant, Thomas realized that staying inside was no longer an option. The storm was no longer merely a natural phenomenon. It was a gateway, an opening to understanding, to facing fears long buried. With a steady breath, he stepped into the chaos, determined to follow the faint, urgent call into the darkness, knowing that whatever awaited would forever change him. Thomas hesitated at the edge of the old shaft, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and frozen earth. Pale dawn light seeped through cracks in the weathered wood and corroded metal, casting faint shadows across the uneven floor. Outside, snow continued to fall silently, muffling the distant hum of wind, yet inside, a subtle tremor vibrated through the walls, as if the very ground beneath was alive with restrained energy. He remained motionless, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The heavy wooden beams above groaned softly, settling under the weight of winter's cold. A distant crack echoed through the tunnel, perhaps ice shifting or the structure weakening, adding to the tense atmosphere. The faint sound of cracking ice beneath the surface hinted at instability, reminding him that every step could trigger a collapse. Suddenly, a movement emerged from the shadows, fluid, deliberate. A sleek figure, familiar and poised. The wolfess. Her thick fur shimmered faintly in the low light. her piercing eyes locking onto him with unwavering focus. She moved with purpose, her posture confident yet gentle, as if silently communicating reassurance. Her nose brushed against a weathered wooden post. Then she paused, glancing back to ensure he followed. He hesitated only briefly, then stepped forward. The snow muffled his footsteps, but he could feel the tension in his limbs. Every muscle coiled, ready to react. Trusting her instincts, he moved deeper into the shadowed corridor. Her presence had become a beacon amid the chaos, a sign that he wasn't alone in this perilous environment. The air grew colder, denser with the scent of mineral deposits and damp stone. A weak, flickering light revealed jagged tunnel walls layered with ice. Small icicles hung like frozen daggers from the ceiling, trembling with each gust of wind that seeped through unseen cracks. The faint crackling of shifting ice grew louder, resonating through the silence, an ominous sign of the structure's fragility. Thomas's gaze darted around, alert for any threat. The wolfess pressed on, her body low and cautious, ears twitching at every sound. He followed, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Why had she brought him here? What secrets did this unstable passage hide? His mind spun with questions, but he knew better than to voice them. Instead, he focused on her movements, trusting her guidance. As they advanced, the ground beneath them trembled subtly, a gentle reminder of the environment's precariousness. The walls seemed to close in, shadows thickening as the tunnel's instability increased. The only illumination was from the faint flicker of a long-abandoned lamp, casting uncertain light along the jagged surfaces. Suddenly, the wolfess halted, her body stiffening. She lowered her nose to the ground, scenting the air. Thomas followed her gaze to a crack in the icy floor, where a faint shimmer caught his eye, possibly a mineral vein or a sign of water beneath the surface. The crack widened slightly, and a soft creak echoed through the tunnel. He held his breath, heart pounding. The risk was undeniable now. Any misstep could cause the ceiling to collapse, trapping them underground. The structure's instability was no longer just a threat. It was imminent. Yet, the wolfess continued forward, unwavering, her gaze fixed beyond the crack. She nudged him gently but insistently, urging him to proceed. A surge of curiosity and cautious trust filled him. She was leading him somewhere, perhaps towards safety or hidden answers. The old shaft, long forgotten and unstable, might conceal secrets or serve as a refuge. He looked into her eyes, searching for reassurance, and found a silent understanding. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless, and the earth beneath threatened to give way. But his instincts urged him to follow her. He stepped closer to the crack, feeling the icy cold seep into his bones. The ground shifted slightly beneath his weight, and beyond the fracture, he glimpsed a narrow opening, dark, mysterious, promising secrets buried deep within. His hand hovered near his coat, gripping it tightly, preparing to cross into the unknown. In that moment, a distant rumble vibrated through the tunnel, more intense than before. The walls shuddered, loose debris falling from the ceiling. An icy gust swept through, carrying the scent of damp soil and ancient stone. Thomas instinctively moved closer to the wolfess, whose body remained tense but composed, alert to every sound. The decision lay before him: retreat to the safety of the surface or trust her and venture further into the darkness. The danger was palpable, yet a stronger feeling of purpose grew within him. Her unwavering gaze told him everything he needed. This was the only path forward, the route that might lead to salvation or discovery. He took a cautious breath, then stepped forward. The floor beneath shifted again, and he caught sight of a narrow, shadowed opening beyond the crack, an entrance into the unknown, promising secrets long hidden. His hand clenched his coat tighter as he prepared to cross the threshold. He cast a final glance at the wolfess, who moved confidently into the shadows ahead. A faint spark of hope ignited within him. Perhaps this forgotten shaft was more than just a trap. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, a fragile thread of trust woven into the icy silence of winter's grip. With resolve firming, Thomas followed her into the darkness, each step echoing softly against the cold stone. The air grew heavier, the distant crackling of shifting ice fading behind them. They pressed deeper into the unknown, driven by instinct, trust, and a faint hope that somewhere within this ancient cavern lay a refuge, if only they dared to find it. Thomas settled onto the uneven planks, the rough surface pressing into his back as the muffled silence of the underground tunnel wrapped around him. The cold seeped through his clothing, biting into his bones, but a faint, almost paradoxical sense of relief washed over him. He kept his eyes closed for a moment, listening to the distant drip of water echoing through the cavernous space. The storm's howling had diminished, replaced by the slow, rhythmic plop of droplets hitting the uneven floor. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his racing thoughts. His muscles ached from the strain, yet exhaustion dulled the sharp edges of fear that had gnawed at him moments before. Memories flickered, images of snowstorms, howling winds, and the faint glow of the surface, reminding him of what he was fleeing from. Here, beneath the earth, he felt a fragile sanctuary, a temporary refuge from chaos. The air was thick with the scent of rust, damp stone, and stale earth. Every breath drew in metallic tang, clinging to the walls and saturating the stale atmosphere. Occasionally, a water droplet broke the stillness, falling from the jagged ceiling onto the ground, creating tiny ripples and puddles nestled in crevices and hollows. Every sound seemed magnified. Each drip, the faint shift of loose stones, the whisper of wind slipping through cracks above. Thomas shifted slightly, feeling the unevenness of the old wooden boards beneath him. His fingers brushed against a damp patch, slick with moisture and age. He knew he couldn't stay long. Exposure to the cold could become dangerous if he lingered. Still, in this moment of fragile calm, he recognized an opportunity. The tremors had lessened, or so he hoped. The recent quakes had slowed, and the shifting sounds had been replaced by a steadier, more subdued silence. He looked around, eyes adjusting to the dimness. Shadows stretched along the walls, flickering faintly as if alive, but no movement met his gaze. Just darkness, heavy and unyielding. He pressed his hand against the rough surface of the wall, feeling the coolness of the stone and the uneven ridges of mineral deposits. Here, in this quiet enclosure, he could breathe more easily, even if his body remained stiff and chilled. A faint noise pierced the silence, a soft scrape from deeper within the tunnel. His eyes snapped open, heart pounding. For a moment, he froze, listening intently. The sound was subtle but deliberate, like something or someone moving cautiously, aware of his presence. His muscles tensed, instinctively preparing for confrontation or retreat. He sat up slowly, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the dying glow of his lantern's ember. Every nerve was on high alert now, the silence stretching taut with anticipation. The scrape repeated, closer this time, followed by a faint shifting sound, debris being moved, or perhaps something crawling along the rocky surface. Reaching for his lantern, his fingers trembled slightly as he fumbled with the rusted latch. He managed to ignite the flame, casting a narrow beam of light into the gloom. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering with the flame's flicker. He held the lantern steady, voice barely above a whisper. "Who's there?" he asked, voice hoarse but controlled. No response, only the echo of the sound, persistent and unrelenting. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement or presence. The air grew colder, and the faint smell of damp earth and rust intensified. He knew he couldn't afford to panic. Any rash move could be fatal in this confined space. The scraping noise resumed, now accompanied by a faint, hesitant sound, like something testing its environment or searching for a way out. Thomas's mind raced, weighing his options. Should he stay hidden and wait, or attempt to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows? His instincts urged caution, but curiosity pressed him to remain alert. Suddenly, a faint whimper echoed through the darkness, fragile, trembling, and unmistakably distressed. His grip on the lantern tightened. The sound was familiar, yet distant, as if carried on a breeze through a crack in the wall. His eyes flicked toward the narrow passage to his right, where the shadows seemed thicker and more oppressive. He moved carefully, lowering himself onto his knees without disturbing the fragile silence. The faint sound drew him closer to the passage, where he glimpsed a fleeting movement, a small shape darting behind a pile of debris. The whimper repeated, more urgent now. Thomas hesitated, then took a deep breath, steadying himself. His battered instincts told him to stay cautious, but the faint hope of aid compelled him to act. Quietly, he reached into his pocket and retrieved a small piece of dried meat he had kept from earlier. He placed it gently on the ground, not yet revealing himself fully. "Come out," he whispered softly. "I won't hurt you." A tense pause followed. Then, slowly, a tiny figure emerged, hunched and trembling, eyes wide with fear. A small, frostbitten paw stepped forward cautiously. Thomas remained still, giving the creature time to trust him. The animal approached, its shimmering eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and distrust. Thomas exhaled slowly, feeling a flicker of warmth amid the cold. This fragile being, like him, was seeking refuge in the darkness. He extended his hand gently, voice calm. "It's okay. I won't let anything happen to you." The creature hesitated, then with a delicate, trembling step, moved closer, accepting the offering. Thomas's fingers brushed its icy fur briefly, feeling the tiny heartbeat pounding beneath the frigid coat. In that moment, an unspoken understanding formed, an instinctual bond that, despite the shadows and danger, they would face this night together. As the darkness lengthened and the cold pressed inward, Thomas realized that the shadows still concealed secrets. But now, amid the silence, a fragile thread of hope had been woven. The faint flicker of his lantern cast a gentle glow on their shared vulnerability, illuminating a new resolve. He looked around again, eyes narrowing as he scanned the gloom. Something still lurked deeper in the shadows, an unseen threat, waiting patiently. Yet, for the first time, Thomas felt a shift. He had chosen to trust, to accept the uncertainty, and to forge a tentative alliance with this tiny creature. The night's silence persisted, but he no longer felt entirely alone. His awareness deepened. He knew the danger was still present, but now he carried a small companion, a sign that even in the deepest darkness, life persisted. With renewed resolve, he prepared to move forward, knowing that the true challenge lay ahead. The lantern flickered once more, casting a soft, wavering light over their unlikely partnership. Thomas's grip on his resolve tightened. He understood that his situation had changed. He was no longer just a lone survivor hiding from the storm. Now, he had a reason to fight, a reason to hope, and a fragile trust that, even in darkness, a spark of life could endure. The shadows stretched long and jagged along the damp, uneven walls of the mine shaft as Thomas settled onto a narrow wooden plank, the rough surface creaking beneath him. The flickering glow of a battered lantern cast shifting, trembling patterns across the damp stones and scattered rusted debris, illuminating the darkness with hesitant patches of light. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving behind a hollow, persistent moan that seeped through cracks in the walls, echoing the tension inside. The cold air bit into his skin, each exhalation clouding in the frigid silence, which now felt heavier than before. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing memories to flicker through his mind. Images of the wolf family, mother, father, and the trembling pup. Their fragile forms haunted him, vivid and raw. He remembered how the small creature had been trembling in his hands, eyes wide with a mixture of vulnerability and cautious trust. That moment had marked a silent shift within him, an awakening to the weight of responsibility. He had promised himself then to protect these creatures, to be their shield against the chaos threatening to swallow them. A faint scratching sound sliced through the silence, sharp and deliberate, pulling him sharply to awareness. His eyes snapped open, and he tensed instinctively, muscles coiling as he reached for his pocket knife. Its dull blade was a mere tool, but in this moment, it was a lifeline. The sound grew closer, more insistent, echoing like the scrape of claws over stone, crawling toward him from the darkness beyond the lantern's weak glow. The shadows shifted, and a faint silhouette emerged, an indistinct form moving with cautious purpose. It was low, deliberate, pausing just beyond the radius of light. As it drew nearer, Thomas saw the faint gleam of eyes, bright, piercing, reflecting the lantern's flicker. The creature's breath was ragged, body pressed low to the ground, muscles tense but not aggressive. He remained silent, watching, his grip tightening on a knife. The wind outside was a distant memory now, replaced by the pounding of his own heartbeat, loud and irregular. The figure paused, then moved forward slowly, settling into a low crouch. It was a wolfess, he realized, her fur matted and streaked with dirt, her gaze sharp yet wary. She looked at him with a cautious recognition, as if understanding he posed no immediate threat, but still wary of danger lurking in the shadows. A moment of tense stillness stretched between them. Thomas lowered his knife slightly, sensing her hesitation. She seemed to perceive that he was not a threat, yet her body remained coiled, ready to spring if provoked. He spoke softly, voice barely above a whisper, trying to convey calmness. "You're safe now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I won't hurt you." The wolfess hesitated, then slowly lowered her head, emitting a soft whine, an almost inaudible sound that stirred memories of her pups, hidden somewhere nearby. Tiny, trembling creatures, vulnerable and trusting, flashed in his mind. Could she be the same one? Had she returned to find her young? The questions flickered like fleeting shadows, drowned quickly by the surge of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. His gaze shifted downward, and near her paws, a faint shimmer caught his eye. A small, dark bundle curled into a ball. Carefully, Thomas extended a hand, movements deliberate and gentle to avoid startling her. As he drew closer, he recognized the unmistakable shape of a pup. Eyes closed, trembling despite the warmth of her body. The little creature looked exhausted, likely from the cold and the chaos of recent days. Relief flooded through him, a sudden surge of hope. That fragile life, that tiny spark of resilience, still alive, still fighting. Gently, he reached out and cradled the pup, feeling its trembling shivers through the thin fur. It whimpered softly, instinctively seeking comfort in his warmth. Thomas pressed his forehead against the tiny head, whispering softly, words of reassurance that sounded more like a prayer than a promise. In that quiet moment, a realization dawned. This encounter was a turning point. The pup's survival symbolized a fragile hope amid the darkness, a sign that life persisted despite the devastation. The wolfess watched him with cautious eyes, her expression softening just slightly, trusting him in a way that felt both fragile and profound. She seemed to understand that he was not an enemy, that he was part of a fragile thread holding together a world unraveling. Outside, the storm had diminished into a distant murmur, but the darkness remained, thick and unyielding. The air grew colder still, and the ground beneath them seemed to shudder faintly, as if the earth itself was weary from winter's relentless grip. Thomas shivered, pulling his coat tighter around him. Yet within, an ember of resolve sparked, an unwavering determination that refused to be extinguished by cold or shadow. He looked down at the pup nestled in his palms, then at the wolfess, whose cautious gaze held a flicker of hope. His mind replayed memories of past sacrifices, moments of tenderness amid hardship. He knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, more storms, more uncertainty. Yet, in this frozen silence, a new resolve took root. He made a silent vow. No matter how dark the journey, he would continue to fight for these creatures, to guide them through the shadows, even if it meant risking everything. Their fragile lives depended on his actions. His grip tightened on the tiny form, a silent promise sealed in the depths of the underground silence. A faint breeze slipped through a crack in the wall, carrying with it a whisper of the outside world, a reminder of the vast wilderness beyond, indifferent and unyielding. Thomas drew a deep breath, feeling both the weight of his responsibility and a renewed flicker of hope. Slowly, he straightened, clutching the pup close, preparing to move deeper into the shadows. The darkness seemed to shift subtly, as if acknowledging his renewed purpose. Somewhere beyond, the wind resumed its mournful cry, but within the mind, a new determination had taken root, born of necessity, compassion, and unwavering hope. The oppressive weight of darkness pressed against the jagged, crumbling walls of the tunnel as the earth beneath Thomas shuddered with violent tremors. Dust and fragments of debris cascaded from the ceiling, settling in thick layers on his shoulders and tangled hair. His hands clenched tightly around the rough-hewn support beams, knuckles blanching, muscles taut with effort. Outside, the wind's fury intensified, howling through cracks and gaps, carrying icy gusts that cut through the darkness and a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very bedrock of the underground refuge. A deep, resonant crack reverberated through the tunnel, followed by a series of violent shudders that made the ground ripple beneath his feet. Thomas froze, eyes darting upward to the narrowing gap above his head. The tremors had become more intense, each one threatening to splinter the fragile structure that kept him trapped. Beads of sweat mixed with dust on his brow as he instinctively tightened his grip on the support, heart pounding with the realization that collapse could come at any moment. His jaw clenched, his chest heaving with shallow breaths, as he scanned the limited space for any sign of a way out or a weakness in the walls. The flickering flame of a candle reflected off the damp, uneven surfaces, casting elongated shadows that danced erratically with each aftershock. The scent of damp stone and rotting wood mingled with the acrid tang of dust and stale air, filling his nostrils with a choking sensation. Suddenly, a jarring jolt threw him forward, causing his hands to slip slightly on the wood. His ears rang from the shock, but he maintained his stance, muscles taut. The ceiling above groaned ominously, a long, twisting creak that froze him in place. He knew he couldn't afford to stay passive. The danger was escalating rapidly. His mind raced to find options, any way to escape or reinforce the unstable tunnel before it was too late. Outside, the wind's scream grew more frantic, punctuated by the sharp crack of falling debris in the distance. Thomas's gaze flicked to the narrow entrance, where a faint sliver of icy moonlight seeped through a fractured opening. The candle's flickering glow cast weak, wavering shadows on the ground, illuminating the chaos around him. He understood that remaining in place was only delaying the inevitable. Rushing toward the exit without preparation could be just as deadly. His fingers curled into fists, then grasped a nearby loose stone, searching desperately for something, anything that could help strengthen the makeshift barrier. A chunk of rubble, a broken plank, or a twisted piece of metal. Anything that might buy him precious seconds. The tremors persisted, each one more violent than the last, causing the ground to shudder and the walls to tremble as if the mountain itself was fighting to break free. Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted as a large section of the ceiling fractured, a jagged slab crashing down with a shower of sparks and dust. Thomas instinctively ducked, shielding his head with his arms, feeling the rush of cold air as debris scraped past him. For a moment, the tunnel was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant, ominous rumble of further shifting stone. He knew he had to act swiftly. With trembling hands, he grabbed a broken piece of timber and jammed it into a crack near the entrance, trying to wedge it tightly. Straining every muscle, he pushed with all his strength, sweat pouring down his face. The tremors eased slightly, but the instability remained, a constant threat lurking beneath the surface. Every second counted. A fresh series of tremors rocked the ground, causing him to stumble back against the wall. The entire shaft seemed to pulse with violent energy, the walls groaning and flexing as if the mountain was alive, fighting to expel him. His skin prickled with fear, but a stubborn resolve took root. He refused to be buried alive. Not like this, not after everything he had endured. His eyes darted toward the narrow exit, then back to the makeshift barrier. It was fragile, insufficient to withstand another major quake. He needed to reinforce it or risk being trapped when the tunnel finally gave way. Reaching into his pocket, he grasped a jagged piece of scrap metal he kept for emergencies. With quick, precise movements, he hammered it into the wooden support, anchoring the barrier more securely. A sudden, thunderous crack shattered the air. The ceiling above him trembled violently, and a large section of stone and timber finally fractured, crashing down in a cloud of dust and debris. Thomas ducked instinctively, feeling the rush of cold air as the debris exploded around him. Darkness swallowed him momentarily, deafening thunder echoing in his ears. When the dust cleared, the tunnel was silent again, but the air was thick with the scent of freshly disturbed earth and crushed stone. The support he had just fortified now bore the weight of the falling debris, yet it held, at least for the moment. His lungs heaved, pulling in ragged breaths amid the choking cloud, muscles aching from the effort. He pressed his palm against the damp wall, feeling the vibrations still coursing through the rock. Outside, the storm raged with unrelenting fury, battering the mountain with relentless force. Inside this narrow sanctuary, a fragile hope flickered. Perhaps the tunnel could withstand this assault. The faint moonlight through the fractured opening hinted at a possible escape route, a glimmer of salvation amid chaos. But he knew he couldn't remain here forever. The tremors would not cease, and the structure's stability was compromised. Carefully, he straightened, scanning the darkness for any signs of further movement or imminent collapse. His grip tightened on the support, every nerve alert to the slightest shift. A faint sound reached his ears, an almost imperceptible scratching, like a whisper carried by the wind. His gaze snapped to the entrance. Was it the wind, or something more? His senses sharpened, muscles tense. The storm outside still roared, but now a new thought took hold. Survival depended on more than just holding the tunnel together. He had to find a way out before the next quake or collapse sealed his fate. He looked around, eyes catching on a loose piece of metal embedded in the rubble nearby. With deliberate movements, he pried it free, then hammered it into a crack in the wall, reinforcing his makeshift barrier. The effort was exhausting, sweat slicking his skin as he pushed himself to the limit. The tremors continued, but the support held firm, a fragile bulwark against the chaos. Suddenly, the ground shuddered violently again, and a large section of the ceiling cracked apart, collapsing in a cloud of dust and broken timber. Thomas dove aside, feeling the rush of cold air as debris exploded around him. Darkness enveloped him briefly, deafening thunder echoing in the silence that followed. When the dust settled, the tunnel was eerily quiet, the air thick with the scent of earth and shattered stone. The support he had reinforced was strained but still intact, holding back the debris. He knew this was only temporary. Each tremor risked undoing his work. His chest heaved with effort, lungs desperate for clean air amid the choking cloud. He pressed his palm against the damp stone, feeling the vibrations still pulsating through the rock. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, battering the mountain with unyielding fury. Inside this fragile refuge, hope flickered anew. The tunnel might still stand, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to escape this nightmare. He moved cautiously toward the fractured entrance, eyes scanning for signs of further instability. The faint glow of moonlight through the cracks offered a possible path forward. He knew he couldn't stay here much longer. The structure's integrity was compromised, and the storm's rage showed no signs of abating. A distant, almost inaudible sound reached him, a faint scratching, a whisper in the wind. His senses sharpened. Was it merely the storm, or was something else lurking outside? His grip tightened on the support, determination hardening his resolve. He had survived this far, and he would find a way out before the mountain finally gave in. The first light of dawn seeped through the fractured ceiling of the underground tunnel, casting muted rays across the uneven, damp walls. Outside, the storm had finally spent its fury, leaving behind a landscape soaked and silent, with snowflakes drifting lazily through cracks in the debris. The air inside was cool and still, carrying a faint scent of wet stone and cold earth. Thomas shifted slightly, feeling the rough texture of the wooden planks beneath him, a stark contrast to the icy gusts still rattling the surface above. He listened carefully, no longer the roar of the storm, but only the drip of melting snow echoing in the quiet. He sat upright, brushing dust and snow from his coat with deliberate movements. The recent hours had blurred into a tense haze of fear, hope, and relentless uncertainty. Now, as the storm waned, a strange calm settled over him, almost like the quiet after a violent clash. The crispness of the air invigorated his senses, reminding him of the importance of clarity and purpose. His gaze swept the tunnel's interior, noting the precarious supports, fractured beams, and crumbling stones that had held through tremors and chaos. He knew better than to trust their stability. The slightest shift could bring the entire structure down. His eyes fixed on the small bundle nestled against a broken support nearby. A young wolf pup, wrapped in a torn cloth, trembling but breathing. Its fragile chest rose and fell with faint, irregular movements. A surge of warmth flooded his chest, a feeling long buried, gratitude. The pup's survival amid the wreckage was a testament to resilience, a quiet symbol of hope amid destruction. It reminded him why he had come here, why he had risked everything. A soft rustle broke the silence. Thomas turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing toward the tunnel's entrance where shadows flickered in the faint glow. At first, he saw only dust motes dancing in the light, the occasional snowflake slipping through cracks. Then, a movement, delicate but purposeful, caught his attention. A figure emerged, slender and graceful, weaving through the debris with practiced ease. It was her, the wolfess. Her sleek coat shimmered softly in the pale illumination, her eyes shining with calm intelligence and quiet strength. Behind her, a smaller form appeared. Thomas's breath hitched as he recognized the tiny, trembling bundle she carried. A young wolf cub, eyes wide and bright, lifted its head cautiously as if seeking reassurance. The wolfess paused briefly, then approached with gentle steps, her nose nudging the pup tenderly before settling beside it. The scene stirred a deep, almost primal emotion within Thomas, an overwhelming mixture of relief and awe. He hesitated, then reached out with trembling hands, voice hoarse but steady. "You're back," he whispered, more to himself than to them. The wolfess responded with a low, reassuring growl, then pressed her head against the young one, as if to shield it. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken understanding, a bond forged beyond words. This was her family, and somehow he was part of it now. The fragile tableau of life contrasted sharply with the chaos that had driven him underground. The storm's fury had passed, replaced by this quiet moment of resilience. The wolfess's return was a silent promise that life endured even amid ruin. Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose swell within him, stronger than any fear or doubt that had haunted him during the long hours of darkness. He reached into his coat pocket, retrieving a small piece of dried meat he had kept hidden for emergencies. Gently, he tore off a tiny fragment and extended it toward the wolf pup. Its nose twitched at the scent, and after a hesitant pause, it nibbled at the morsel. The wolfess watched intently, then nudged her offspring softly, encouraging it to eat. An unspoken exchange of trust and care unfolded, an affirmation that they would look after each other. As the dawn's light grew brighter, spilling through the cracks and illuminating the tunnel's interior, the outside world revealed patches of earth and stone, softened by the storm's retreat. The shrill cry of wind had faded into a whisper, a distant echo of chaos. Inside, a delicate peace settled, a fragile harmony born from shared survival and mutual trust. Thomas's gaze drifted upward toward the fractured ceiling, and for the first time in what felt like eternity, a flicker of certainty ignited within him. His mission had shifted. No longer was he merely surviving in the shadows. He was now a witness, a protector of this fragile life. The Wolfus's return reaffirmed his purpose, to defend and nurture what remained of this battered wilderness. It was a sign that life persisted, resilient and unwavering, even in the face of destruction. He moved closer, hand steady as he gently stroked the soft fur of the young wolf. The pup looked up at him with trusting eyes, unburdened by suspicion or fear. Thomas felt a quiet pride swell within, an acknowledgement of the bond forming in this moment of quiet connection. Suddenly, a distant creak echoed through the tunnel. His senses sharpened. The instability of the structure was still a threat. Yet, he understood that retreat was no longer an option. Not with this wolf family here. Not when they needed him most. Taking a deep breath, he inhaled the cold, crisp air, feeling its clarity settle into his lungs. The weight of responsibility pressed down, but alongside it grew a renewed sense of resolve. Carefully, he rose to his feet, glancing toward the tunnel's exit. Outside, the landscape was softened, the danger diminished, and a faint shimmer of sunlight hinted at new beginnings. He turned back to the animals, voice barely above a whisper. "We stay together now. We move forward." The words felt true, an unspoken vow of trust and hope. His role was shifting, no longer just a lone survivor hiding in shadows, but a guardian of this fragile life, a bridge between wilderness and humanity. As he prepared to lead them into the awakening world, a quiet determination took hold. The storm had passed, and with it, the chaos that once threatened to consume everything. The dawn marked not just the end of a perilous night, but the start of a new chapter, one guided by resilience, trust, and hope as they stepped into the uncertain future together. The winds howling intensified as Thomas crouched behind the thick trunk of a gnarled pine, his breath ragged and shallow. The storm had erupted suddenly, catching him off guard as he scrambled from the collapsing shack. Now, amid the swirling blizzard, he clung to the fleeting shelter of the trees, knowing that his survival depended on quick thinking and resolve. The snow battered his face, each gust like a hammer, blurring his vision and muffling the world into a white chaos. He pressed his back against the rough bark, eyes darting over the landscape for any sign of safety. The shack had been his only refuge, until the storm's relentless assault had torn it apart. The roof had buckled under the weight of snow and ice, splintering and collapsing in a thunderous roar that still echoed in his ears. Now, with debris settling into the snow, the building was just a memory, a reminder of how fragile safety was in this wilderness. His mind raced, weighing his options. Staying here was no longer an option. The structural damage meant the shack could cave in at any moment, possibly trapping him beneath fallen beams. But moving across the open terrain meant risking frostbite, disorientation, or worse. The trees offered some protection, but the wind still tore through them with savage fury. He had to reach the forest's edge, where the terrain might slow the storm's fury enough for him to find a safer spot. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers fumbling over the small, sharp pocket knife, then grasped a rag he kept for emergencies. With a quick, practiced motion, He tied the cloth tightly around his face to filter the icy air. The cold bit into his skin, but it was better than risking frostbite or inhaling snow-blown debris. He adjusted his battered backpack, feeling the weight of his limited supplies, just enough to sustain him a little longer if he could find shelter. The wind's scream grew deafening, almost deafening enough to drown out the faint cracking sounds from behind him. His ears caught the ominous groan of the trees around him, their branches straining under the weight of ice. Every step forward was a gamble. The snow beneath his boots was treacherous, hiding unseen hazards. He had to move carefully, deliberately, pushing past the paralyzing fear that threatened to freeze him in place. A sudden, sharp crack jolted him. His eyes widened as he saw a large limb above him sway ominously, then snap with a deafening snap that echoed through the storm. The falling branch struck the ground inches from his feet, kicking up a spray of snow and ice. His muscles tensed instinctively, but he kept moving, knowing that hesitation could be deadly now. The storm's fury was relentless, and every second counted. He aimed for a small cluster of trees ahead, where the terrain dipped slightly, offering a momentary break from the worst of the wind. As he hurried, he caught sight of a narrow ravine nearby, a natural depression that might provide some cover. His heart pounded, driven by the urgent need to find a stable refuge before the next collapse or gust knocked him over. Suddenly, the wind shifted direction, howling with renewed ferocity, almost as if warning him to turn back. But he pressed on, eyes fixed on the ravine's shadowed entrance. The snow was deeper here, and he sank into it up to his knees, each step an effort of will. The storm threatened to swallow him whole, but he refused to give in. Just as he reached the edge of the depression, a deafening creak erupted behind him. The entire canopy of trees seemed to shudder as a massive branch snapped off, crashing down with a thunderous boom that shook the earth. For a moment, everything was silent except for the howling wind. Thomas froze, heart hammering, then darted into the ravine, crouching low behind a cluster of rocks and tangled roots. Inside the narrow space, he took a moment to steady his trembling limbs. His lungs burned from the cold, and his fingers numbed by the icy grip of the wind. He knew he couldn't stay here long. The storm was still raging, and the ravine offered only temporary shelter. He had to keep moving, further into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the terrain more unpredictable. He emerged cautiously, scanning the dark silhouette of the woods ahead. The snow here was less disturbed, but the shadows danced unnaturally in the swirling snowflakes. Every sound was amplified. The crack of ice, the distant groan of the collapsing shack, the whistle of the wind through the branches. He felt the weight of the storm pressing down on him. Yet within that chaos, a flicker of clarity emerged. He needed to find a more secure refuge, one that could withstand the storm's wrath. He spotted a fallen log partially buried in the snow, its hollow core promising some protection. Moving swiftly, he ducked inside, pulling his coat tighter around him. The interior was dark and damp, but it shielded him from the worst of the wind. For a moment, he allowed himself a breath of relief, until he noticed the faint glow of daylight filtering through the broken branches above. The storm was still active, and the sky was darkening further, promising more fierce weather. His thoughts sharpened. The shack's collapse was a stark reminder that his initial plan, waiting out the storm, was no longer viable. Now, survival meant pushing further into the forest, seeking a place resilient enough to endure the night. He had to abandon the idea of returning to the open plain or lingering near the remnants of the shelter. The storm's fury had changed everything. He checked his supplies again, his knife, a piece of cloth, a small flask of water. Every item was vital now. With a determined breath, he pushed himself out of the log and resumed his cautious trek, heading deeper into the woods. The snow was deeper here, and the terrain more treacherous, but the trees offered a natural barrier against the wind's full force. As he moved, he kept his senses alert. The distant rumble of the collapsing shack faded behind him, replaced by the muffled sounds of the forest, branches creaking, snow sliding, the wind whispering through the pines. His mind focused on the next step: find a sturdy shelter, avoid the falling ice and debris, and wait out the storm's worst. Suddenly, a fresh gust of wind tore through the trees, carrying with it a sharp, metallic clang. Thomas froze, instinct telling him to stay hidden. Peering around a dense thicket, he saw a flash of something metallic buried beneath a pile of snow. A discarded piece of equipment, perhaps part of a broken vehicle or a stranded traveler's gear. It might be useful, or it could be a trap. Carefully, he moved closer, eyes scanning for movement or signs of danger. He knelt, brushing snow aside to examine the object. It was a rusted, battered axe, sharp enough to cut through fallen branches or ice, and sturdy enough to serve as a makeshift tool or weapon if needed. Grabbing it, he felt a surge of confidence. With the axe in hand, he was better prepared to clear a safe spot or to defend himself if necessary. The storm raged on, but Thomas's situation had shifted. The collapse of the shack had been a brutal wake-up call. Waiting passively was no longer an option. Now, he knew he had to adapt, to push further into the wilderness, seeking shelter that could withstand the storm's relentless assault. Each step brought him closer to a new understanding. Survival depended not just on luck, but on his ability to read the landscape, make quick decisions, and endure. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the forest in white silence, Thomas pressed forward, his resolve hardened. The night was far from over, but he carried within him a renewed determination. Whatever dangers lurked ahead, he would face them. The storm would pass, and with it, the old fears and uncertainties. In its place, a new strength grew, one born from necessity, forged in the icy crucible of the wilderness. Thomas steadied himself on the icy ledge, muscles tense as he stared into the abyss below. The wind sliced through the frigid air, howling like a restless beast, carrying snowflakes that spun in chaotic circles before dissolving into the darkness. The faint echo of distant gusts reverberated through the hollow tunnel, a haunting reminder of the storm's relentless fury. Every nerve in his body screamed for caution, yet his gaze remained fixed on the treacherous drop beneath him. Behind him, the small group of animals huddled close, pups trembling with cold, their eyes wide with silent fear. The wolfess's silhouette flickered in the shadows. Her calm presence was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. She had led him here to this precarious edge, and now the moment of choice loomed. The storm raged beyond the fragile barrier of ice and stone, threatening to swallow everything if he hesitated further. His fists clenched, then relaxed as he wrestled with his internal conflict. The decision was brutal: to stay and risk his life, or to retreat and abandon the vulnerable creatures depending on him. He remembered their trusting eyes, the silent plea in their gaze, fueling his resolve. Turning away meant leaving them exposed to the merciless elements, but staying could cost him everything. The wind intensified, tugging at his coat and threatening to unbalance him. He took a deliberate step forward, feeling the icy stones shift beneath his boots. His grip tightened around a weathered wooden beam embedded in the ground, an anchor amid the chaos. The rough surface was a stark reminder of the harsh reality surrounding him. The storm's roar grew deafening, blending with the distant cracking of ice, as if nature itself was testing his resolve. A sudden gust swept past, stronger than before, nearly knocking him off balance. His eyes narrowed as he looked back at the animals. The pups curled tighter, trembling not just from cold, but from the weight of their fears. The wolf's steady gaze met his, unshaken and resolute. In that silent exchange, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, an unspoken vow to protect them. He hesitated, then took another step toward the darkness of a shaft. The abyss yawned beneath him, a void swallowing hope and certainty alike. The instinct to retreat clawed at his mind, but a deeper voice, born from months of hardship and solitude, urged him onward. A stubborn determination took root, refusing to yield to despair. He clenched his jaw, breathing slowly to steady his trembling limbs. Suddenly, the storm's fury intensified, a fierce gust ripping through the fractured rocks. It carried with it a mournful cry, perhaps a wolf's lament or the wind's own lament. The sound resonated deep within him, awakening a primal understanding. The creatures outside depended not just on his strength, but on his will to endure. Their lives hinged on his decision. His gaze shifted to the small family of animals behind him, then back into the darkness ahead. Internal conflict raged. Fear versus duty, doubt versus hope. Tears threatened to freeze on his cheeks, but he blinked them away. There was no room for weakness now, only clarity and resolve. With deliberate calm, Thomas knelt beside the wolfess, placing a hand on her thick fur. It was warm and reassuring beneath his palm, grounding him amid the chaos. She nudged him softly, a silent prompt to trust his instincts. His fingers brushed her snout briefly, sealing an unspoken vow. He would not abandon them. Rising slowly, he straightened and cast one last glance into the blackness of the shaft. The storm pressed against him, but he found a fragile steadiness within. The moment stretched into eternity and endless choice. Then he made it. He turned away from the precipice, stepping back onto the icy path. His mind immediately began strategizing their next move, evaluating risks, considering options. The storm still howled around them, but a quiet certainty now guided his actions. The animals depended on his bravery, his unwavering resolve to face the unknown. As he moved away from the edge, The wind's roar softened, almost as if acknowledging his decision. He glanced at the wolfish one last time, a silent thank you passing between them. Shadows cloaked his figure, but inside, a flicker of hope ignited, a faint but persistent ember. The biting cold pressed against him, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between life and death. Yet, each step forward felt lighter, more purposeful. He was no longer merely a spectator in the shadows. He had chosen to stand firm, to protect those who depended on him. The darkness still stretched endlessly ahead, but his resolve was unshakable. What lay beyond remained uncertain, but for now, he had made his choice. The storm continued its relentless assault, but he responded with quiet determination, an unyielding promise to face whatever came next. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glow of dawn hinted at a new beginning, just beyond the icy horizon. Thomas hesitated only for a moment, then reached out with steady resolve and gently grasped the trembling bodies of the young wolves. Their fragile limbs squirmed against his grip, but he held firm, mindful not to cause injury. The faint glow of the rising sun seeped through a narrow crack above, casting a warm amber hue across the dust and dirt of the underground tunnel. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, a stark contrast to the icy wind howling outside. He carefully lifted the first pup, feeling its small, warm form press against his palm. Its fur was matted and dirt-streaked, yet beneath that, he glimpsed a flicker of innocence and resilience. The second, slightly larger, pushed itself closer, whimpering softly. Thomas's grip tightened slightly, instinctively reassuring himself that they wouldn't slip or hurt themselves further. The tunnel around him was silent save for their faint breaths and the distant, muffled creak of the unstable shaft above. As he moved forward, the faint light grew brighter, and the tunnel widened into a small chamber. Dust motes danced in the filtered sunlight, drifting lazily in the still air. Thomas's eyes flicked around, scanning for any sign of danger. The trembling of the pups diminished gradually, replaced by a fragile sense of safety. He gently laid the smaller one onto a patch of soft moss he had brushed aside earlier, then carefully did the same with the larger. A gentle breeze slipped in through a crack in the wall, carrying a faint, earthy aroma. It was a sign of life returning to this forgotten place. The pups whimpered again, curling instinctively for warmth. Thomas reached into his pocket, retrieving a small cloth from his supplies, and wrapped the pups snugly. The act was simple, yet it grounded him amid the chaos of the underground. Suddenly, a faint rustling echoed from the shadows. Thomas froze, senses sharpening with years of experience. His eyes darted into the darkness, waiting. Out of the gloom emerged a sleek, gray figure, a wolfess, her coat shimmering softly in the muted light. Her piercing gaze met his calmly, almost expectantly. She stepped closer, her movements fluid and deliberate. Thomas's shoulders relaxed slightly, recognizing her as the same wolfess he'd seen before. Trustworthy, confident. She paused beside him, tilting her head slightly, then nudged the bundle of cloth with her nose. The pups stirred again, whimpering softly, and he gently stroked their fur, feeling the tiny thumps of their hearts. Her presence seemed to steady him, a silent reassurance amid the uncertain darkness. The wolfess emitted a low, reassuring growl, almost as if she understood his gratitude. With a careful motion, she turned her gaze toward the tunnel's entrance, then back at him. It was as if she was urging him to follow her, to leave behind the shadows and move toward the light. Thomas hesitated, weighing his options. He could wait for rescue, but instinct told him that trusting her was the safer choice. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out a small, worn piece of bread. Breaking it into tiny crumbs, he offered it to the wolfess first. She accepted gracefully, nipping at the food before glancing at the pups. Then, he set the remaining crumbs nearby, hoping it would serve as a sign of good faith. His mind raced, considering the risks. Trusting a wild creature could be dangerous, but the wolfess's calm demeanor suggested she was not an enemy. Carefully, he scooped up the pups once more, this time guided by the wolfess's steady presence. Her body pressed close against his side, as if to shield him from unseen threats. They moved slowly, navigating the uneven terrain, the faint light guiding their way. Every step was deliberate, as if walking a tightrope between worlds, the shadowed depths behind and the promise of safety ahead. Outside, the storm's fury persisted, but within this hollow, a new calm was taking shape. The howling wind was replaced by a softer whisper, an almost imperceptible reminder that resilience endured even through the coldest nights. As they approached the tunnel's mouth, Thomas paused, glancing out onto the snow-covered landscape. The morning sun was beginning to pierce through the storm clouds, casting long, golden rays across the frozen wilderness. His chest felt lighter, the weight of despair momentarily lifted. The mission he'd embarked on days ago, the endless vigilance, the search for hope, had shifted. Now, it was about survival with purpose. The bond he felt with the pups and the wolfess was no longer just about rescue. It was about trust, responsibility, and a new beginning. He looked down at the pups nestled securely in his arms, then at the wolfess whose steady gaze conveyed understanding. For the first time in a long while, a quiet certainty settled within him, that his purpose was no longer just to endure, but to protect and nurture this fragile new life. The storm still raged, but in this moment he saw a sliver of dawn, a promise that even in darkness, hope could be reborn. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of pine and freedom. The storm was far from over, but the shadows had begun to recede. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the crisp cold fill his lungs, and stepped forward. The path ahead was uncertain, yet his resolve was clear. He had helped them escape, and in doing so, had rediscovered a part of himself he thought was lost. As they emerged into the daylight, the snow crunching softly beneath their paws and boots, a new sense of purpose blossomed within him. The world outside remained harsh and unforgiving, but now he carried a quiet hope, a spark that refused to be extinguished. The bond forged in the depths of the earth, in the heart of darkness, was stronger than ever, guiding him toward whatever awaited beyond. The sun's rays stretched across the frozen landscape, illuminating the path forward. Thomas looked down at the pups, their tiny bodies warm against his chest. Then at the wolfish beside him, their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, he understood. This was the beginning of something greater. The darkness was behind them, replaced by a dawn of renewal. And with each step, he felt the weight of his past lighten, replaced by a newfound purpose, one rooted in trust, hope, and the promise of new life. Thomas sat quietly inside the small cabin, the first light of dawn filtering through the narrow, frost-covered window and casting a pale glow on the snow-blanketed landscape beyond. Outside, the world lay silent and still, the only movement the gentle drift of snowflakes lazily descending from a clear blue sky. The air was crisp, each breath forming a fleeting cloud that quickly vanished into the cold. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint creak of the wooden walls as they settled in the morning chill. His gaze lingered on the horizon, where the snow stretched endlessly, untouched and pristine. The landscape seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the day to unfold. A thin layer of frost coated the edges of the window pane, shimmering like tiny diamonds in the weak sunlight. Thomas's thoughts drifted, not with the chaos of recent weeks, but toward a quiet clarity born from solitude. He inhaled slowly, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, and exhaled with deliberate calm. This moment of stillness was a balm, contrasting sharply with the turmoil that had marked his recent past. Here, in the quiet, he sensed a fragile peace settling within him, an understanding that this solitude was no longer just a refuge, but a foundation for a new purpose. His eyes shifted to the snowbank outside, where delicate snowflakes continued their lazy descent, each one settling softly onto the ground. The shimmering surface of the ice reflected the sunlight, creating fleeting patterns that danced across the frozen expanse. This scene, so tranquil and enduring, reminded him of the resilience of nature, how life persisted beneath the cold, waiting for the right moment to awaken. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the scent of pine and cold air, invigorating his senses. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, savoring the moment's clarity. Memories surfaced, long walks through dense woods, the warmth of a fire crackling in his old cabin, the distant howl of wolves echoing through the night. These images felt distant now, overshadowed by the weight of survival and solitude. Yet, somehow, they returned, softly, like whispers from a forgotten chapter, reminding him of a time when life was simpler, more connected. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a small, worn cloth. Carefully unfolding it revealed a handful of dried herbs and a piece of bread, simple provisions that had sustained him through this harsh season. He ate slowly, each bite grounding him further in the present. The act was deliberate, almost ritualistic, a conscious act of gratitude for the sparse bounty surrounding him and the quiet strength it provided. As he finished, a sudden movement caught his eye, an owl gliding silently across the sky, its wings barely stirring the air. Its flight was purposeful, and its silent presence seemed to carry a message of awareness and resilience. Thomas watched intently, feeling a kinship with the bird, both of them small parts of this vast, enduring wilderness. The owl's flight reminded him that even in the coldest, most desolate moments, life persisted with intent. He rose slowly, feeling the stiffness in his limbs from hours of stillness. His gaze shifted from the sky to the distant hills, where a faint flicker of movement drew his attention. Perhaps an animal or a trick of light. He couldn't be sure. But he remained still, alert. The landscape around him was alive with subtle signs of renewal. A squirrel darting through the underbrush, the faint swelling of buds on the distant trees, traces of footprints in the snow hinting at unseen creatures stirring beneath the surface. A decision formed quietly in his mind, born from the clarity of this moment. He had come here seeking solitude, answers, perhaps a final refuge from the chaos of the world. But now, as the tranquility deepened, he realized that his purpose was shifting, no longer just to endure, but to observe, to protect this fragile sanctuary. The land had offered him peace, and in return, he felt compelled to safeguard it, becoming a guardian rather than an outsider. He stepped outside, the crunch of snow under his boots sharp in the stillness. The air was invigorating, filling him with a renewed sense of strength and resolve. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep into his bones, and looked around at the untouched beauty of the landscape. Every tree, every patch of snow seemed to hold a story, silent witnesses to the resilience of life and the quiet promise of renewal. A gentle breeze stirred again, whispering through the pines as if the forest itself was offering an invitation. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding the significance of this moment. He would stay. He would watch over this land, ensuring that its serenity endured despite the hardships. This was his new purpose, a vow made quietly but with conviction. As he turned to re-enter the cabin, his gaze caught sight of a distant hill. Something moved there, perhaps a fox slipping through the underbrush, or a shadow cast by the rising sun. He paused, watching, waiting. The moment felt charged, as if the land acknowledged his decision, affirming his resolve. A calm settled over him, deeper than before, blending with the lingering chill of winter. He entered the cabin, the door closing softly behind him. A faint smile touched his lips, not from happiness, but from a profound sense of clarity. The future remained uncertain, and challenges undoubtedly lay ahead. Yet, in this moment, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence and white, a clean slate awaiting the return of life and hope. Thomas moved to the window, watching the landscape once more. His understanding had deepened. This land was more than a refuge. It was a testament to resilience and renewal. He had found his place among it, committed not only to his survival, but to its preservation. The quiet strength of the wilderness mirrored his own emerging purpose, to guard this fragile harmony, come what may.